All right, so this is a demonstration of the first project, which is going to be creating three different pieces of wood. A 4x8 sheet of 3/4 inch plywood sitting on the ground, a nominal 2x4 standing upright, and then we'll do an 8x8 timber beam that's above the ground. Okay, so let's start with our sheet of plywood. What I like to do is if I'm doing any piece of wood that's in a project, I'm going to make it a new component. So I'm going to call this plywood. And I can see that I have a component started here in my browser. I'm actually going to open it up so I can see what's going on as we make things there. So let's go create a sketch. And that sketch is going to go inside this component. I'm going to select the ground plane. I'm going to go up to Create, select Rectangle, 2-point, click in the origin, move away, and now I can type in 4 feet using the asterisk, tab 8 feet, and enter. And I will zoom out a good bit. And now, if we look at the dimensions inside the sketch, I'm going to drag this dimension off to the side a little bit so we can see it. That says 8 feet. And drag this one down, and that says 4 feet. So our sketch is ready to go. I'm going to finish the sketch. I can either click here or open this green arrow. Now we're back in our home view. And we can look over in our browser and see that we have a sketch. If I hide it, it goes away. All right, so now I'll come up to extrude. I've got an upward pointing arrow, so I'm going to pull that upward and then type in 3/4 for 3/4 inch and press enter. And now if we look over here, we now have a body created underneath our plywood component. And that is all that you need to do. Let's go ahead and verify our measurements. So if we just hover over this edge and click, in the lower right corner of the screen we see one edge, length of 8 feet. If we click on this edge, we see a length of 4 feet. And if we click on this edge, we see a length of 0 foot 3/4 inch. So that's perfect. That is our first component. So now let's move into a 2x4 that's standing upright, and let's make that 8 feet tall. So again, I'm going to make a new component. I will call this 2x4 and press enter. You can see the new component shows up in our browser. Now let's go ahead and collapse the plywood component. So I'm going to collapse my sketches, I'm going to collapse my bodies, and then I'm going to collapse plywood itself. Now, when I do that, I can see what's going on a little better here. And I no longer see my 2x4 component. So let's expand this and see what I did wrong. I think what I did wrong is, well, I know what I did wrong. I had the plywood component selected when I created the 2x4 component. So the 2x4 ended up nested inside the plywood. So all we need to do is just drag that up into our main model and all will be well. So if I close down plywood, I can see I've got my 2x4 here. If that doesn't work for you, make sure you're at the end of your timeline here. Okay. All right. So we now have a 2x4 that's directly underneath our main level. And we are going to make a sketch. Let's see. We wanted to put the 2x4 standing upright. So again, we're going to pick this ground plane. But let's move away from our sheet of plywood. And I'm going to hit R for rect. And I'm just going to move to the right here. And so the first dimension that's highlighted is my bigger one. And I'm going to type in 3.5 for 3.5 inches. And then I'm going to hit the tab key and I'll type in 1.5 for 1.5 inches and press enter. And let's go ahead and zoom in on that. We can move our sketch dimensions inward just to verify that they're correct. 3.5, 1.5 inches. Remember, we can move these dimensions anywhere we want. And in fact, if you no longer want to see the dimensions, you can come over in the sketch palette and actually hide your dimensions here by unchecking that check mark. Okay, so we're done with our second sketch. Let's finish. Let's open up our 2x4 component and just make sure that that sketch ended up in the right spot, which it did. And now, when we hover over this sketch, it goes blue, which means it's a closed profile and we'll be able to extrude that. So if I go up to the extrude, I've got an upward pointing arrow. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to go in the opposite direction and I wanted to go downward. You see how there's a negative value here? So whether it's plus or minus that you need for your extrude value is depending on where Fusion assumes you want to go and where it sticks the arrow, the direction of the arrow. So the direction of the arrow will always be positive. If you want to go in the opposite direction, you simply have to put a negative value in. But we do want to go upward. So I'm going to type in 8 feet and press enter. We now have an 8-foot 2x4. We should have a body here. Okay. Great. So we are done with that component. Let's close that up. And now the third thing we want to make is a 4-foot long 8x8 timber above the ground. So let's do it in this direction. Now, when we create a component, Fusion is going to stick that component in whatever other component is activated. And remember, the last time we had plywood activated. This time we'll be a little smarter. We will activate our top level and then we will create our component. And this is going to be a beam. Okay, so now that's at the correct level. And let's create a sketch. I'm going to create it on this front plane this time. And I will press R for rectangle and start sketching my rectangle. This top dimension is going to be 4 feet long. And then I'll hit tab and we'll put 8 inches in. Now, there's a number of ways we could do this. So this sketch is now 4 feet long, 8 feet high. And when we extrude, I pressed E for extrude, I can push this 8 inches and get my body. Let me show you another way of doing it, which might make more sense for you. I'm going to do Control Z until we get out of that sketch. So if I open up this beam, we can see there's no sketches now because I undid all the operations. Let's make a sketch, and this time we're going to go on this plane, and I'll press R for rect, and I will make an 8x8 profile here, so 8 inches, tab 8. So now we've got an 8x8, 8 inch by 8 inch square, and we can use extrude to push this 4 feet long. So here are our sketch dimensions, and I'm going to finish my sketch and click on extrude and push that 4 feet and type in 4 feet, enter. And now we have a body, and we can close everything up. And let's now activate our top level component, which lets us see all of these 3 pieces of wood undimmed, essentially. And we can individually hide each one just to make sure we've done the right thing. Let's go ahead and verify the measurements of the beam. So if I click on this edge, I've got 8 inches. This edge, I get 8 inches. And let's see, this edge, I get 4 feet. So I'm looking in the bottom right corner to see that information. So lastly, let's save our file. So I'm going to click on this save icon. Let's navigate to the folder that we want, which is the Fusion 360 Woodworking Session 1 folder. And I am going to type in the name, which is 3 pieces, if I can spell piece right, pieces of wood, and press enter. So that is the first project. Okay, so our second project is going to be a framed wall made out of 2x6 studs and a top and bottom plate as part of that wall. So the first thing is we're going to create a new design. I can do that either by coming to the file menu and selecting new design, or even easier, come over to these tabs and click on the plus in the tab. Now I've got an untitled design. The first thing I'm going to do this time is to do a save, and I will call this framed wall, and the location is in the Fusion 360 Woodworking Project Session 1 folder, which is what I want. So I will save. Now the reason I did a save with nothing in my model is that when you save, you start Fusion's automatic backups. It will not automatically back up anything that you haven't started a save on. So if we do a few things and the power goes out or whatever, we will get an automatic backup here, which we wouldn't have if we hadn't saved. Okay, so again, my methodology is always put any new piece of wood into a component. So I'm going to click on new component, and I'm going to call this plate. And you'll see the plate shows up here with a component icon next to it. Now let's go to our sketch. We're going to create a sketch on the bottom plane. And I'm going to press R for rectangle. I'll click here. I want to move to the right 20 feet. And then I'm going to hit tab, and I'll type in 5.5 for inches and hit enter. And let's zoom out a whole bunch and look at our dimensions in our sketch. Here's our 20-foot dimension, and here's our 5.5 inch dimension. So if I orbit up, you can see the entire sketch here. If I zoom out and orbit, I'm going to finish my sketch. I'm going to open up my plate in the browser so that I can see that I've got control over that sketch, and it's within my plate component. Now I go up to extrude, and I'm going to pull this up by the thickness of the 2x6, which is 1.5 inches. So I'll type in 1.5 and press enter. So there's my 2x6. I'll verify the measurements by clicking on edges. So this edge says 20 feet. Zoom in. This edge says 5.5 inches. And this edge says 1.5 inches. And again, I'm looking in the lower right corner for those dimensions. All right, so this time we're going to draw our sketch for our next component on top of this plate, which is a convenient place to put it because that's where we want it in 3D space. So first thing, I'm going to go up to my framed wall and activate that. The reason for that is the next component is going to be inside the framed wall. I don't want it inside my plate component. So I'm going to collapse up my plate component and create my new component, and I will call this stud and press enter. So here's my stud component with nothing in it yet, but it is activated automatically. So I will create my sketch, and this time I'm going to pick this top surface instead of one of the 3 planes from the origin. This is dimmed, but I can still select it. Okay, so now I want to go up to my 2-point rectangle. This time I'm going to start from my origin. I'll click there. And now you can see I'm snapping to this top line, which is fine. That's exactly what I want. And you can see the measurement on the left says 5.5 inches. So I just have to type in this bottom measurement, which I'll type in 1.5 and press enter, and everything looks good. All right, so I'll finish my sketch, and here is my profile that I can extrude. Let me open up the stud component in the browser so I can see what's going on here. And after we extrude this, there should be a bodies folder that's automatically created. So I'm going to extrude this profile up 8 feet. I'll type in 8 apostrophe, and we get a body here. Okay, so let's collapse our stud, and let's create a second plate, but it's going to be identical to this first plate. So we can actually make a copy of this plate here, and we want to put it inside our framed wall. So I'm going to activate the framed wall. I'm going to click on plate to select it, then right click and select copy. Okay, and then I'm going to right click on my framed wall and select paste. Okay, and now I get our movement triad here. So I can actually move the copy around. And you can see that it's actually difficult to position this exactly where we want it. And let's see where that triad started. It actually started in the center of this long plate, which is not very useful. It's in the center in this dimension and in the center vertically. So we have nothing to snap to here. So I'm going to go over to set pivot, and I'm going to pick this point right here, and I've got to finish my set pivot movement. So that's why I'm clicking on this green check mark. Now I can start to move. Okay, and if I move this in a direction that I want to go and click on a surface that I want to go to, it will snap there. So I'll just press OK. So now let's zoom out and see what we have. So we have the start of this wall. We have the top and bottom plate and a single stud. Okay, let's do the same to fill in this wall. We want studs 16 inches on center, and we could do the same copy and paste that we just did, but there fortunately is an easier way to do that. We're going to go to create and down to pattern, rectangular pattern. So now we get a feature dialog box on our screen, and it says, well, what type of rectangular pattern, what type of copying do you want to do? And it defaulted to faces. We want components, because this is a component, so we're going to reproduce that component. Now it's saying, well, okay, select your object that you want to start with. So I'm going to come over here and click on that first component. Now, the next thing here in the dialog box is direction. So I am going to click there, and I'm going to select the direction I want to move in. So I can click on any line, any edge, or any axis that goes in the direction I want to move. I want to move in this direction, so I'm going to click on this line. So now our direction is set. You can see the blue arrow is going this way, and I want it to go that way. That's fine, but now we have to realize we're going to put a negative value in when we go to the right, because Fusion guessed improperly that we wanted to go to the left. Okay, so the distance here, let's see our choices. The distance is extent, which we could say, we want to go 20 feet, and then you could fill in the number of copies. Let's try that. So if I say extent, and I'm going to put a distance in of 20 feet, which is the length of our wall. Then we can increase our quantity. Well, see what's happening here is because that arrow is going in the wrong direction, all of our studs are going in the wrong direction. So to fix that, I'm just going to put a minus sign in front of 20. So now it's basically saying you want this rectangular pattern to be 20 feet long and you want 5 copies. So I'm going to increase the number of copies. This box is identical to this one, by the way. So I can either be in the dialog box or the one that's floating on the screen. But you can see now I'm guessing at the spacing between these. So that's really not what I want. I'm going to go up to distance type and pick spacing. And now I want my distance to be minus 16 inches. And again, the minus is because the default arrow was in the wrong direction. Okay, so our distance is 16 inches on center, and quantity will just keep going up to until we fill this wall in. So I've got 16. It's actually going a little bit too far, but we're going to fix that. And now we'll do an OK. So look what happened here. The rectangular pattern created a bunch of components for us, which is fine. That's exactly what we wanted. So we have 2 things that we want to do here. One, we don't want to see these 16 different studs. I would like to put those inside another component, and we will be able to not have to look at all of those and clutter up our browser. So let's create a component just for the purpose of sticking these 16 studs into. So our framed wall is our active component, and I'm going to click on New Component, and I will name this one Studs, plural. Okay, I can name it anything I want, but so I'm going to stick all of our individual studs inside that stud. So I am clicking on stud, and now I'm holding down my control key and clicking on each one of these individually. So we're selecting all 16 studs here. And once there's, oops, I screwed up. Let me show you a faster way of doing this. I'm going to start on stud 1. I'm going to hold the shift key down. So I selected all 16, but I also have this plate here. So I'm going to control click on that to deselect that. So just checking here, we've just got our 16 studs. And now I'm going to drag one of those into studs, plural. And you can see now that if I open our new component up, all of the individual studs are inside there, which is good. Okay. Now, this is the guy we want to move, and we want to move this edge over to this edge on the plate. So I'm going to hit M for move. Move copy dialog box comes up, and it says, well, what do you want to move? I want to move a component, and now it's saying, well, select the component. So I go over, I select my component. Now it's asking me what move type do you want? So I'm going to click on point to point. And now it's saying, well, select the origin point. So click here. Now it's saying select the target point. So I'm going to click here. And now it previews the move. It actually hasn't done it yet. It's just showing you this is what you would get. Is this what you want? And if it is, you can just click on OK. So now we have moved that stud to the proper position. Let's go up and activate our top level, and everything is selected, so I'm going to click off of it, and there is our stud wall. So let's verify dimensions. These studs were supposed to be 8 feet long, so I click on that edge. Bottom right I see 8 feet, and if I click here on the top I see 20 feet long. Now, if we wanted to measure the overall height of this wall, including the top and bottom plate, we can go up to Inspect, select Measure, and now we can do this in a couple of different ways. Let's click on this face right here, and then let's orbit and zoom in and click on this face, and we'll see that it's 8 foot 3 inches. So 8 foot for the studs, and then another 3 inches for the 2 plates. So that is our project. Let's go ahead and save again. And we've got our framed wall done. Okay, so our final project is going to be creation of a timber bent, which is an assembly of timbers. So we're going to have 2 posts with a beam sitting on top of those posts. So first off, let's create a new design. So I'm clicking on this plus tab, and first thing, I will go ahead and save it so we get our automatic backups going, and I'll call this timber bent and press enter. Okay, so first off, we want to create a new component. We will call that post, and we want to create a sketch inside that post. So let's make sure the post is activated. It is, so we can select our ground plane. We're looking at it from the top. We're in a sketch. We go up to create, select a rectangle. I'll get a 2-point rectangle. I'll click in the origin. I'll move to the right and type in 8 and tab and 8 and enter. And if we zoom out, we can look at the dimensions, and it says 8.0 and 8.0. Okay, great. So now we want to exit our sketch. And if we zoom out, we can see we have this profile, selectable profile on the ground. Let's go to extrude, and the arrow is pointing up, so we don't even have to drag this. We can go right to entering in the dimension, which can be done over here in the dialog box as well. So I'm going to type in 10 apostrophe, so 10 foot, and press enter. We can verify this is 10 feet by clicking on that. Our link says 120 inches here. This is a good time. I haven't done this yet, I think, but let's go to our preferences. And I want this to show up in, let's say in this case, in feet and inches, if you're doing a timber frame. So let's go to our unit and value display. And foot and inch display format says decimal. I'm going to change that to architectural. So this should be feet and inches. So apply, okay. So now when we click on an edge, it shows up here as 10 feet. If we click on this edge, it shows up as 0 foot 8 inches. So that's perfect for timber framing. Okay, so now we're going to make a beam that sits on top of this post. So the very first thing is we want to create a new component. Now, beware that the post is the active component. If I created a new component now, it would be inside the post. That's not what I want. So I'm going to activate the top level, which is our timber bent. Then I'm going to create the component, and I will name that beam. Now, beam is selected, post is now dimmed out, and I want to create this beam right on top of this post. So actually, I'm going to create my sketch on this face. So I can pre-select here by clicking on that face. Even though the whole thing is dimmed, I can still see that I've selected that face. And now when I create a sketch, Fusion does a look at. It's looking straight at that sketch. Straight at that post. Now I can do my sketch here and extrude it back, and life will be good. So I'll get a 2-point rectangle. I snap to this point. I come over here. I type in 8, tab, 8, enter, There's my 8" by 8" rectangle. I'm going to navigate a little bit to the side so I can see my post and see which way I'm going to extrude. Now, again, I can either extrude while I'm in the sketch, and I know I'm still in the sketch because I have this big green check mark in the sketch palette here, or I can exit the sketch first. So I'm going to finish the sketch, and then I'm going to go up to extrude. I'm going to hover over this surface. Now, because I'm hovering on this side of the surface, as opposed to this side, when I click here, I'm going to have an arrow, I believe, that's going to be pointing back towards me, right? If I unselect this here in the dialog box, if I had clicked on this side, that's interesting, I still get an arrow going in the wrong direction. All right, that's not a problem because we can always push this in either direction. But the thing to be aware of, when you go in this opposite direction from the initial arrow, it's a negative distance. And that's pretty clear. If you, if I type in 15 feet without a minus sign here, it's going in the wrong direction. So I know that I need to edit that distance and simply put a minus sign in front of it before I click OK. Or I could come back at a later time in the timeline, do a right click and edit the feature. So even if you get that wrong, you don't have to undo it. All right, so now let's see what we've got. If we go up to our timber bent and activate the entire model, click off of the pre-selected stuff, and now let's hide the post, show it, hide the beam, show it. Great. Now, we could draw another post here, and I don't think I've covered this yet, but there's two ways to make a copy. You can make a copy so that everything will change, like all instances of the copy will update when you do any changes to any of the copies, or you can make it unique. In this case, let's make a unique copy, and then we'll prove that we have a unique copy. So in order to do that, when I click on this beam and I right click and say copy, now this is my active component. So when I paste, I'm going to get it inside the timber bent, which is what I want. Oh, but you know what? I don't want to copy the beam. I want to copy the post. So I'm going to select the post, right click, copy. I'm already activated my timber bent. So now when I right click and do a paste, it will be inside the correct inside the correct what am I trying to say? Inside the correct component. Now what I wanted to do is do a paste new here, and I'm not seeing that. All right, let me try that again. I'm going to do a copy, and then I'll come up to timber bent and right click. Oh, there it is, and do a paste new. I don't know why that didn't show up the first time. So when we do a paste new, there's a second copy of this post that's superimposed on the first one, and it shows up a little bit differently. If we had just done a paste, it would have said post 2, post:2 here. Now it says post in parentheses 1, 1. That means there's only one instance of this second post, and Fusion renamed this, auto renamed it by just sticking a 1 on the end of it. So a little confusing there, but we can rename that. So now when we move this guy, where do we want to go? Well, remember that when Fusion automatically selects this pivot point, it puts it in the middle of an object, which is kind of a pain. And we want to perfectly align this, but we've got no way to snap it. So we have to reposition this pivot point. And that's what this little thing is, same as this one here. It's set pivot. So if I set the pivot and put it anywhere on the outside, it can be on this face, it could be on either of these two edges, or it could even be here. So it's easiest just to put it on this edge somewhere. Now when I'm on that edge, Here's where I screw up all the time. I don't check this mark. If I continue to move this triad thinking I'm going to move this post, it's not going to move the post, it's going to move this triad and screw myself up. So be sure when you change the pivot like we just did to click on this check mark. Now the pivot is set and now you can start moving. And since the pivot is now on this edge and we move in this direction, I can simply click on this face and boom, they're perfectly aligned. So that's a nice little movement trick, but it does require you to reset the pivot point from the middle of the post to somewhere on this face, and then you can just select this and it'll automatically get there. Okay. Long-winded way of saying do a couple of clicks and it'll end up in the right spot. Okay. So now what I wanted to demonstrate real quick is these two posts are not identical. For instance, if I go into one of them and change this sketch, double click here to edit the sketch and zoom in, and let's say we're going to change this to 10 inches. So I double click on that dimension, press enter, that's 10 inches, finish my sketch, and now you can see this timber is 10 inches in this dimension here, but the other one is not. Okay, now if I had done a paste, it would have been. I did a paste new, which means this is essentially a different component. It does not respond to the changes that I did in the first component. Okay, so I'm just going to do a Control Z, which is going to back me out to here. So that is our finished timber bent.